Hey, Lisa, welcome to the His and Her Money Show.
Hello, Lisa.
Hi, happy to be here. Talaat and Tai, how are y'all today?
We are doing
Awesome.
well. We're glad to have you here as well because, you're going to provide some information that I think not enough people are having conversations around. And I think more people need to have their ears open to this. So we are super
I'm
excited
very excited
that
about
you
this.
are here on the His and Her Money Show today. So before we jump into all of your wealth of information and knowledge, can you just take a moment and introduce yourself to everyone that's tuned in and let them know what you're all about?
Happy to, but I'm going to start with the right back at you. I've had an opportunity to listen in to lots of your podcasts, and I am just really excited about the work that you all do, not just in providing inspiration for folks, but very practical tools and tips for how they can take action on their own financial life. And it's a podcast that I have shared with my husband and with my nieces. So really, really excited to be on with you all today. So I'm going to start and talking about myself in two categories. One is what I do for work, and the other is I want to talk a little bit about my money story to get us started off. So from a work perspective, I lead Wells Fargo. I'm the head of consumer strategy marketing for Wells Fargo. And it's one of those things you have to, when you say that to your mom, is like, well, what does that mean exactly? So I help the organization understand the unique needs of our students, emerging, affluent, and affluent segments, so that we can really help make sure that the services and products that we offer are positioned in a way to help serve their unique needs. Now, prior to that, I was in a very similar role in diverse segments. And so I led the African American, Asian, and Hispanic segments. And prior to that, I was the segment lead for the African American segment. So a lot of experience and kind of understanding, what makes people tick, and understanding a little bit more about what's unique across these segments. And in this role, I get to see a lot of information. It's not just demographic information, but a lot of behavioral and sort of the mindsets on finances and how people really apply their finances. So that's my work story. But then my money story is, I would say that I find that people are really shaped by their experiences and their exposure. And I'll give you two examples from my own life of how that's true. So first, from an experience perspective, I grew up in Buffalo, New York. And we had this store in Buffalo called Twin Fair. Twin Fair was like a Target, but not quite Target. It was Target before Target was Target. And Twin Fair was a grocery store, but then they had all kinds of household items and goods. And so we would go to Twin Fair. We'd walk up the street to Twin Fair, and we shop. And we'd always be throwing things in the buggy. And my mother would be taking things out, and we'd throw more things in. And I remember one time in particular where we got up to the register, and we had more things than we had money for. And that is a real moment, not just as a child, but to sort of see my mother have to reconcile, okay, what are we going to put back, right? So this notion about put something back. And I think it struck me. We didn't have a conversation about it. She just figured out what she needed to take out of the basket while there's a line of people in their baskets behind us. So that was, I think, one moment in my money story. And then another, fast forward many years, when I went off to college, I went to a small engineering college called Clarkson University in Potsdam, New York. And I remember I was working at the admissions office, and there was a lady who worked in there, and she was just chatting, and she said that she had bought a car and she paid cash for it. And I'm like, is that a thing? You buy a car and you pay cash with it? And so two very different ends of the spectrum, but just, I think, to illustrate how people's experiences and their exposure combine together to create their money story. And now for me, I never really imagined I'd have a career in finance. I also didn't know what segment strategy was back when I was young. But the thing that I'm really excited about is that I am in a role where I really do get to see and lead work that really helps people get their financial lives in order so they can do the things that matter most.
Awesome.
That's awesome. I love that. So in hearing those two stories, I could not help but think about the term wealth gap. And I know a lot of people hear that term, but maybe they don't really fully understand what it is. Can you explain to our audience, what does wealth gap mean, and how can someone basically improve in their wealth?
Absolutely. The first thing I would want to say is that wealth is different than income, right? So income is what you make, but Pew, who does a lot of research on the wealth gap and some stats that I'll quote later, they define wealth as a household's total assets minus their total liability. So very straightforward, but just important to note that those things are different. And so one of the studies that Pew has done, they do a lot of studies on the wealth gap. And what they found was that in 2016, the median household income for white households is about $117,000. The median household wealth for Caucasian households is about $117,000. That's 10 times the household wealth of African American households, which is about $17,000. And so if you start to think about what that means, it really is. It has an ability. It impacts people's ability to fund their needs and their dreams, right? And to fuel economic growth. And so, I think even more importantly is that your wealth has a direct impact on your financial well-being, your financial health, because wealth brings choices, and choices mean control. It means freedom. It means security. And so I think those things are important. And so there are a lot of things that people can do to actually address and start to build wealth, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about.
Sometimes when we talk about this subject, some people will comment back and make the assumption or the assertion that, is the wealth gap really a thing? Because in the way that the world is set up now, anybody can take control of their life and they can achieve things, this, that, and the other. This isn't the past. This is 2018 and beyond. We can do this, that, and the other now. We just have to take the reins. So you've done a lot of research. You've studied this for a long time, as have we. What have been some of the contributing factors to this wealth gap, and how would you address people that come back with that retort?
Well, there are a lot of, I would call, systemic issues that really contribute to the wealth gap, and I'll name a couple. So one of them is, particularly in the African American community, the lack of generational wealth transfer. Lots of data that shows, quite severe differences in generational wealth transfer. There's higher rates of college debt, and also not just higher rates, the percentage of people who have college debt, but the amount of college debt that they have is higher. There are lower home ownership rates in the African American community. And we also know that the housing crisis of 2008 had a pretty broad impact on a lot of African American households and the equity that they had. Entrepreneurship, while there's a lot of great stats out there around the growing entrepreneurship in the African American community, our businesses are not at entrepreneurial parity. And this is really a factor of what are the revenues, what are the number of employers that they have as employer firms, employees as employer firms. And so all of these things are very systemic things that, yes, there's been progress, but at the same time, we have all these things to deal with. Now, I say there's a flip side to that, though. And to me, the good news is that there is an increase in income. There's an increase in educational attainment. It's really about putting it all together and having some really dedicated wealth building strategies. I don't believe that these factors are true. However, they don't have to be the story, right? We get a chance to rewrite the story.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about rewriting this story. So in your opinion, or at the micro level, what can individuals or families do in order to kind of bridge that wealth gap?
Yeah, I love that you asked about the notion about individuals and families, because we were very interested in this at Wells Fargo. So we did a study a few years ago that looked at, what's driving the wealth gap in various communities, and African American communities was one of them. And one of the things that we found, this is so fascinating to me, is that people see money as a private matter that shouldn't be talked about publicly. About 90% of respondents said this on one hand. And then on the other hand, most of the folks also said that that money wasn't talked about in their households. And, and they also wish that they had learned about money sooner. So I think one of the things that we need to do is that we have to give people a language around money. We have to help folks kind of break that stigma about talking about money, which is why the work that y'all do, I think, is so incredible, because this is exactly, what we're getting to. I'll add a few other insights, and then we can talk a little bit about what folks can do to overcome them. One of the other things is that in the African American community, there's sort of this, I call it a full plate of financial priorities. So you think about sending kids to college, you think about buying a home, you think about maybe starting a business, caring for elders. It's all these things that folks need to do. And it can be overwhelming for anyone. But then when you add to that, there's this sort of optimism that's been present in the African American community for a long time. It could be due to faith or just having to have overcome a lot of things. But when you add together sort of this, the privacy around money, this full plate, which kind of often leads to inertia, I have called this the inertia of optimism, right? So you think everything's going to turn out okay, or everything's going to be all right, and you're not sure where to start, and you don't start anywhere. And so what we have to do again is kind of give people a language around money and make it okay for families to talk about money. I'll share an example from my own life. I have a niece, and she was 5 years old, and I brought my niece to spend the weekend with me. I lived in Rochester at the time. She lived in Buffalo, so I came and picked her up. We took her to a little museum that they have, a kids museum in Rochester. We went out to lunch, and then we're going home, but she had forgotten her toothbrush. So we go to the grocery store, and of course she wants the Disney toothbrush. And I'm like, no, we're getting the store brand toothbrush because there's quite a difference in price, as you all know. So, we went on about our business. So about 2 months later, I'm back in Buffalo visiting my family, and my niece is there, and she says, Auntie Lisa, you're cheap. Cheap. I'm like, I'm the one who's always giving you things and taking you places. What do you mean cheap? And what do you even know about what cheap means at 5 years old? And so I said, I'm like, no, I'm not cheap. I'm frugal. I don't want to waste money on things that I don't need to waste money on. And, that was years ago. She's 20 something now. But I can tell you just from that one conversation, we have had many conversations about money, many conversations. And my point is to give her the advice, and she has to decide as a young woman what she wants to follow. But it really at least has allowed us to kind of break down that stigma and be able to have a conversation about what do we need to do to build wealth. So I think a lot of it is just being open, and particularly from a family and a relational perspective, to be able to have a conversation. It's in the category of tough conversations that you need to have, but you still need to have them, and make sure that folks are doing that to kind of get them on the path to understanding where you are so you can decide where you want to go.
Do you have any advice for parents on the how to do that? Because you mentioned earlier the fact that one of the things that has caused that gap in wealth is that African Americans have not been able to pass down wealth in the sense of dollars and cents, but maybe we can do a better job of passing down wealth as far as informational transfer. But some people might feel intimidated because they don't have it all quite figured out themselves. So how am I going to teach my son, my daughter, my niece, my grandson? Any advice there?
Absolutely. I would just say, make it open. As parents, I don't have children of my own, but I see, with my nieces and nephews, and as I was growing up, that just being that exposure, going back to the experiences and the exposure, just that exposure. So when it's time to sit down and write out the bills, as they used to say, today is more electronic, right, and digital. But when it's time to do that, when you have that time, make it family time, right? So your children get to see that there's money that comes in, there's money that goes out. I think the other thing is involve children in starting to build some of their own financial decisions. So if they get an allowance, helping them understand that save some, spend some, and have these different buckets of money. And then they'll start to get a sense of what it means to budget, and also what it means to make trade-offs, because kids are very good about going to a store and saying, I want this X dollar pair of whatever, until you say, okay, you can have it, but you've got to take it out of your pot. It changes the conversation a little bit, right? So I do think that having a level of transparency, and that's age appropriate, right? If you're having a lot of trouble in debt, for instance, and you have very young kids, you might want to think about how to share that with them that doesn't create a extra burden on the kids. But as they get older and they're also starting to make choices, then I think involving them in those choices is a really helpful way to start.
I love that. And I love the fact that you mentioned your niece was 5 at the time. And I think that it's so important that, like you said, whatever age your child is, break it down on their level. You were still able to use it as a teaching moment, and you didn't just ignore it, but you actually addressed it. So I love that. And we do that with our kids now. So let's talk about entrepreneurship. Why should one consider looking at the avenues of entrepreneurship, and how can that help them with building wealth?
Yeah, that's a great question. We Entrepreneurship is certainly on the rise, and Wells Fargo did a study a few years ago on, we call it a diverse lending study. So we looked at what are some of the lending experiences across various segments, and what we found is, one of the questions we asked is, why do people want to get into business? And a lot of it had to do with wanting to be in control, like wanting to lead their own destiny, and a lot of it also had to do with how they were serving their communities and so forth. And so it does give you a higher level of control. But I would say that you still have to very carefully consider whether or not entrepreneurship is right for you. And the reason I say that is this. One of the other things that we found is that when we started to ask some of the folks in the study, well, what are your annual revenues and what's your profit? There, you would be surprised how many people had a difficult time articulating what their revenue was and what their profits were. And so that just goes to show that people, a lot of folks are very comfortable working in the business and doing that thing that they love, whether it's tech or as a restaurant or wherever the case might be, but not on the business. And to be a successful business owner, you really have to do both. And so what I think that means is that folks, number one, need to understand why they're getting into business and what kind of business you want it to be. A side hustle is fine if you want it to be a side hustle. But if you're getting in small business, but you actually want to scale, then you really have to think about your business in a very different way. And either one, you really have to just make sure that you know what you're getting into, and that if you don't have the expertise of all around, then you can rely on the help of a banker or an accountant or an attorney to really help you round out the business acumen of your business so that it can be successful and deliver what you want it to be. And it's not easy. So I think anyone can consider it, but everybody needs to decide whether or not it's for them. And then for those who go on and do it and are successful, it's not only can be a economic growth engine for themselves, but also for the people that they employ, something that can be passed down in families. So there are some really positive bright spots, but you just have to go carefully.
I think it's an important conversation that we're having, because I don't think that, I know you're not going to get taught this in school. And most of the time, you're not going to be taught this stuff from your family. So like when we go around and we teach this stuff, whether it's online or in person, people love to jump to, hey, so how do I invest? Or, hey, how do I start a business? Because that's more of the sexier financial topics to talk about. Nobody really wants to talk about money management, though. Nobody wants to talk about how to structure yourself so that you're not blowing money, so that you have the money to do those things. So from your perspective, how important is money management when it comes to wealth building?
It is so important. It's like you have to know where you stand. If we all wanted to get to New York, y'all are going from Atlanta, I'm going from San Francisco. Destination is the same. We all want to get to New York, but how you get there is going to be very different depending on where you start from. And so money management to me is a tool that shows, where are you today? What's your personal situation? And it has to be encompassing of everything, right? What are your savings? What are your debts? What are your liabilities? What are your goals? How does that figure in? What things are about to happen that may impact your financial picture, short term or long term? And so having that sense and sensibility about where you are in that money management and having a plan for it, not just letting it happen to you. I think it's one good thing to just take stock of where you are, but then go from taking stock to taking control, so that you're driving to where you want to get to, is so important, not just for personal finance, but also for a business, because otherwise, money, it can just seep through your hands. And so you really need to have a very clear plan on how it's working in your life. Is it working the way that it's intended to work? And is it really fueling a life that you want? And not the keeping up with the Joneses life. I say a lot for African Americans, it's not so much about keeping up, it's about catching up with the Joneses, given a lot of the challenges that folks have had before. But even so, are you being true to what you want? Are you being true to your values? Is your money working for your life in the way that you have defined it relative to your values? And I think as we talk about wealth, one of the things that's important is knowing your net worth is important, but your net worth is not your personal worth, and it's not your personal value. And being able to disentangle those things is really important. So you should let your values guide your money, and how you relate to money, but don't let your net worth define you.
Talk about net worth. Break that down for someone that may have, heard that for the first time. What actually is net worth?
Yeah, it is. It's really a measure of what your assets are, the assets that you have, which can be cash, or if you have a 401k, or if you have equity in a home, minus your liabilities. So any debts that you owe, if you have credit card payments, you have a car payment, you have a mortgage on your home, you take those things away, and that gives you your net worth. So it's your assets minus your liabilities.
Speaking of assets, let's talk about savings for a minute, because I think intellectually people know they should save money, put money away for a rainy day. We've heard terms like that, but very few people, according to research, are getting it done, or getting it done at the proper levels that they need to. What advice would you have to people, A, on the importance, and B, on how to get it done?
So important to save for so many reasons, right? One is just so that you have a safety net. A lot of people are, nearly one disaster away from financial distress. And so having a bit of a safety net really helps to ease that burden of whatever else is happening in your life that you need to deal with. So I think that's one of the important reasons. The other thing is savings can be a means to building wealth through investing, right? So if you have some savings on hand, and you're able to invest, whether it's in real estate or into traditional investments, that gives you that opportunity when you have those funds. Now, my philosophy, and one of the tips that Wells Fargo has, is we've got sort of, we call this one little thing, right? So we've got these 8 things that you can do, because the point is that a small change can make a big difference. And one of the things in these 8 tips that we have is pay yourself first. I tell you, when I get paid, I pay my taxes, I pay my tithes, and I pay my tips. So my taxes and tithes, I'm sure you get, but my tips is what I'm saving for myself, right? And the way that I do it is just automated. The taxes, we know, come out automatically. My tithes, my mother says sometimes, she calls me, Lisa, did you go to church today? I didn't go to church. Well, she says, well, you got to go to church to pay your offering. I'm like, my offering gets paid when I get paid. I've done it electronically. So I do that. And then on a savings. So whether it's your 401k or any additional savings, that comes out right when the paycheck hits. So I've made that decision. I've made it once, and I've automated it. So I think wherever you are in your financial life, being able to make the decision and automate, and it's okay to start small, start where you are. One great tip is for those who are able to participate in a company sponsor 401k, often there's an employer match. That is a great way to accelerate your savings. So if they're matching, up to X percent, try to save at least that amount. And a lot of them also offer the opportunity for you to start at, let's say, 1%, and then eventually bump that up to 2%, and then eventually bump that up to 3%. And you might say, well, 1% or 2%, what is that? Let me tell you. Starting early, starting small, being consistent, it pays off over time. There's lots and lots of data to support that.
So true, so true. So let's talk about home ownership. It can be either a financial blessing or a burden for some. In your opinion, what's your take on home ownership?
I think it's really about being ready, right? Getting the home that you can afford for where you are, and that suits your lifestyle. And so it's really important to start and consider what your personal situation is. Are you ready for it? Not just financially ready, but are you responsible? Will you pay your mortgage on time? Will you pay the insurance? Will you take care of the home, the homeowners association, if you have one? All of those things come to bear. And another point around home ownership is buying what you can manage, right? So kind of going back to that notion of keeping up with the Joneses. If what your budget says is you can afford a 1,500 square feet, 3-bedroom, 1-bath house in a nice neighborhood, that's the house you should go for, versus trying to get something that overextends you. And they have that phrase that you're house poor. People, you don't want to live that. You also need to save or have some considerations and savings for things like maintenance and things that as a homeowner you really don't want to think about, but invariably these things come up. And then also have some dollars left over to do the other things that you like to do, whether it's vacation here or there, or again, send your children to school or whatever those things might be. So I think it's just really important to make sure that you get into a home with eyes wide open and knowing what are all the costs and all the expenses, and being prepared to manage those. There are a lot of great programs. I think there's a myth that you have to have a lot of money for a big down payment to get into a house, and there are a lot of programs out there that have a low down payment, and I would say those are good as long as, again, you are sure on the back end that you got enough income to support continuing to pay the mortgage, whatever it is, and all the other bills that go along with that. And Wells Fargo has some programs. One of them is called Neighbor Lift. It's done in association with an organization called Neighbor Works, particularly for low to moderate income, where we actually provide education. So getting all the things that I just talked about and getting you ready for home ownership, in addition to down payment assistant grants. Now, grants are a great thing because we know grants don't need to be repaid. So the grants, I think, are an excellent way for those who are disciplined and are ready for home ownership to get in at a way that's comfortable. And this is really, I think, so important in the community in terms of over time building equity and kind of leading to building wealth. And Wells Fargo is so interested in doing this that we've actually made a commitment to help 250,000 homeowners, African American homeowners, by lending $60 billion over the next 10 years. And what's great about that is it's not just the lending, but as I said, that includes 15 million for home education programs that we're partnering with a lot of organizations in the community to make sure that it is actually a blessing and not a burden.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to have links in the show notes to this program.
For sure. That right there, like when you said that, like chills literally went up my arm, because it's so powerful to know that Wells Fargo is it's an institution, it's a company. I mean, you guys are big, huge, but you're also focusing on the educational side of it and helping those that you said are low to moderate income families. Like that to me is that's amazing. It's amazing.
It's the opposite of what was happening back when the crash happened.
Because
a lot of people went into homeownership uneducated and ended up in situations that weren't stellar, or ideal. So kudos to Wells Fargo for making that happen. One of the things that you're going to need, though, to be able to get approved for that home is good credit. And I think that now more than ever, credit is more of a big deal than it has ever been before. I think sometimes it used to be kind of easy to say, I don't need credit score. I'm going to buy my car in cash, or I'm going to pay my house off. But now insurance is running your credit. Jobs are running your credit. The utility companies, the cell phone companies, everybody's checking your credit. So talk about some proactive measures that people can take in order to get their credit in an ideal situation so that they can be able to take part in the things that they want to.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm going to share a few tips, and then we've got a site called the Smarter Credit Center, and we can get the link for that for your listeners and for the viewers. But one of the things is take on the credit that you can manage. There's a lot of calculators out there that really look at your debt to income ratio. And you have to consider all forms of debt, consumer debt, which could be loans or cars and those kinds of things, credit cards, as well as your home mortgage debt. So all of that put together, what's your debt to income ratio? Always, always, always pay on time. Even if you're just paying the minimum, pay on time. That is a big part of your credit score. And it also shows lenders what is your ability to pay and to repay. And so that's very important. If you can, pay more than the minimum, right? There are a lot of ways that you can pay down your debt and pay it down faster. You think about two ways. One is paying down your high interest rate debt faster, taking those things that have higher interest rates and paying those down faster if you have extra to add on. And then the other way is, as you probably all know, is the snowball method, where you take the smaller debt that you have and you pay that one off, and then you roll that payment to the next one. And I think either of them work. The difference, I think, with the snowball method is that it gets you some early wins and you start to see that momentum and it keeps you going. But whichever one kind of is the one that's going to keep you consistent and keep you committed and focused, I think that's really what you have to do. And then I give one more tip, which is really around knowing your limits. So understanding if you've got a credit card that has a limit of $3,000, you don't want to be spending up to $3,000 every month, right? You want to make sure that you know your limits and kind of, because that's another one of the things that factors into your credit score is your utilization. So if you can keep your utilization lower, then that also helps you. So, and then I think the other thing with that is just having a budget, just going back to this notion of total money management and having a full view and a full picture, and why we want to have some extra savings on the side is so that you can really manage your debt in a way that is comfortable, and that you're not getting any extra fees because you're paying late, and those kinds of things is really, really important to building a strong healthy credit. And the last thing I would add is that a lot of institutions, including Wells Fargo, offer access to your FICO score. And they even do some modeling that lets you know if you do this, then what happens to your credit score. Take advantage of those things. Like sometimes, I've been there at a time when you didn't want to know, but it's so important that you know, and therefore you can figure out what you should do about it.
So true, so true. So let's talk about Wells Fargo. You guys have a lot of resources, even free resources out there and tools. We check some out ourselves over at wellsfargo.com/financial-education. Again, guys, we'll have all the links included in the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, check the show notes. But tell us, where can people go to find a lot of tools, and what are some of the tools and resources that you guys offer?
Oh, definitely. And we have so many, and I'd love for them all to be in one place. And you mentioned one, financial education. There's a lot of great things there. And I'll just go over a few more. One is wellsfargo.com/financial-health. And that one goes back to the 8 tips and tools that I talked about earlier, the sort of the one little thing. And it's just, if you're looking for someone, or if you're someone who wants to figure out what's one or two things I can do now to get started, that's a great site for you. Another is our Smarter Credit Center. And so it's wellsfargo.com/goals-credit/smarter credit. Again, I'll send that to you also. You can link to it easily. But the Smarter Credit Center has all the things that we just talked about, right? So how do you pay down your debt? What kind of debt should you be taking on? How should you be thinking about the various kinds of debt? And so there's a lot of good information on building credit if you don't have any, and maintaining healthy credit. For small business owners, we have www.wellsfargoworks.com, and that is a site that has such amazing information for entrepreneurs. It has, and what's great about this and a lot of the sites is that it's not just for Wells Fargo customers, it's open to the public, because we are so interested in making sure that folks understand and have access to the tools and resources that they need. So wellsfargoworks.com has a few great things for entrepreneurs. The first is a business plan center, so you can use that site to create a business plan, and it even has a competitive intelligence tool. So if you're opening up a salon in your neighborhood, it will tell you sort of a lot of the stats and facts and figures about salons. And again, this is open to the public. So that's one thing on wellsfargoworks.com. The other thing it has is also marketing resources. So we know one of the things that we heard in the study that we did is people want more access to figure out how to market their business, how to get more customers. And so this site has a variety of marketing resources that businesses can use. And then the last is that there's also a Smarter Credit Center for businesses, because the types of credit that you need for business are often a different type of credit that you need for your personal life. Though sometimes they get commingled, but there are some different options out there for small businesses. So wellsfargoworks.com for small businesses is a great one. The fourth one is around home ownership, because that is so important, is wellsfargoworks.com/mortgage/advancing home ownership has all the information about the programs that we talked about, and Wells Fargo's commitment to helping more homeowners. And then the last that I'll list is one that I'm especially proud of is handsonbanking.org. www.handsonbanking.org. Now, you'll notice that one didn't have any Wells Fargo mention in it. This is a program that we've put together that is not Wells Fargo branded at all, and we make it available to the public for teachers all the way from young children all the way up to high school, college, or adults and everything. And it's available for anybody to use. It can be from your church, from your community center, if you've got an investment group, anybody, and such great resources and tools that people can use to really educate themselves around a wide variety of financial topics. And what's great about this is that we're also moving to the place where we're helping to understand what people's financial capability is. And so, you can sign up, and then we're going to be able to help measure where you are today and start to look at how people are progressing is one of the things that we're looking at doing. So it's really kind of helping measure not just did you learn something, but how are you applying it to your life to build your financial capability. So we'll make sure you get the links to all of those resources.
Yes, please give us
I'm
some
impressed.
links. That's amazing.
I'm impressed. Well, and I'm like, as much as I know and read and search, why don't I know about any of these websites? Number one, so that means that most people don't know about them. So we need everybody tuned in to go check out the fact that all this stuff is available, free. You don't have to stay in the same place that you are. You can grow. You can get better. You can do better with these resources. Please go to the show notes at the conclusion of this show and start to dig around and take advantage of all this information that Wells Fargo is providing. Now, Lisa, there might be somebody listening, though, who they just been through a lot. And despite all the great advice and all the great resources that you've mentioned today, within themselves, they're still a little doubtful as to whether or not they have the ability to get on top financially. Like they've tried and failed and tried and failed, and they're losing hope. What words of encouragement would you offer to that person?
Yeah, listen, I think that's a great question, and I have been there. And what I would say is just to start small. Pick one thing, whether it's looking at your accounts, making a budget, deciding to save 1%, $1 a day, whatever it is. I would say start small, just be consistent, and wherever you can, automate means making a decision once and letting it work for you. You don't have to think about it. And I would say I don't believe that there is really any situation where, no matter how bad it may seem today, that you can't do something that gets you in a better position than what you are today. So just choose something, start small, automate, and then surround yourself in your circle with like-minded people. Find those folks who are, not necessarily there, there is a journey, right? Not a destination, not those who are necessarily there, but folks like you all. And there's so many great podcasts and resources out there that just have such an amazing wealth of tips. Just pick one thing, commit to doing it, do it consistently, and you will start to see the results.
This has been great, Lisa.
Amazing.
Great advice and great information that you provided today that I know our audience is going to take full advantage of and start to move in the right direction financially. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the show today.
Well, thank you. It's my aspiration personally to see particularly people of color move from being consumers to being owners, to being investors, to being philanthropists. And so anything that I can do both personally and professionally to help get the message out and just also be transparent about where I've been, I think is important, and really also give you both so much credit for what you do every day.
Thank you.